The conference room was silent except for the sound of Mark's voice. He was leaning back in his leather chair like he owned the world, which I guess he thought he did. "Allison," he announced, looking directly at me with a smirk spread across his face. "Effective immediately, you're relieved of your leadership responsibilities." My team sat around the table in shocked silence. I felt heat rush up my neck and into my face. My hands trembled slightly, and I pressed them flat against the conference table to keep them steady. Mark's smirk widened as he watched me struggle to maintain composure. This was what he wanted. This was his victory moment. I could see it in his eyes. He was enjoying my shock and pain. I forced myself to take a deep breath and keep my mouth shut. Saying anything in this moment would only give him more ammunition. So I sat there silent, while he continued to explain my removal as though it was for legitimate business reasons. But we both knew the truth. Mark slid a stack of papers across the conference table toward me. They were supposed to be my performance review. But as I scanned the pages, I saw nothing but lies. "Performance issues," the document stated. "Unreliable," it claimed. "Unable to meet team standards," it concluded. None of it was true. I had worked harder than anyone at this company. I had stayed late countless nights. I had given up holidays and weekends. I had brought in clients that saved the company during difficult financial periods. But looking around the conference room, I saw colleagues shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided my eyes completely. Others looked at the floor. Nobody was going to defend me. Nobody was going to speak up and say that these accusations were false. I realized in that moment that I was completely alone in this room. My jaw clenched so tightly that my teeth hurt. Rage burned in my chest like a wildfire. But I forced myself to stay calm. I forced myself to breathe. I had to think clearly. Acting impulsively right now would only make things worse. My name is Allison Carter, and I'm in my early 30s. I built my entire career at Mercer & Associates, a large consulting firm. I started as an entry-level analyst and worked my way up through sheer determination and skill. I worked when other people slept. I perfected my craft while others watched television. I studied industry trends and client needs. I became someone that clients wanted to work with. I became someone that junior staff wanted to learn from. I believed that hard work meant something. I believed that loyalty was rewarded. I believed that if you gave everything to your job would take care of you. I was naive. Looking back now, I can see how foolish I was. But at the time, I truly believed that the world worked that way. I thought that merit meant something. I thought that justice existed in the corporate world. Mark entered my life about 2 years before that fateful conference room meeting. He was hired as my new supervisor after my previous manager retired. First, I thought I was lucky. Mark seemed like a dynamic leader. He had energy and enthusiasm. I thought maybe he would be someone who would appreciate my work ethic and help me advance in my career. When I landed the biggest client of the year, a massive account worth millions in annual revenue, I was thrilled. I went to Mark's office to tell him the good news. I thought he would celebrate with me. Instead, I watched his smile freeze on his face. His eyes went hard. "That's impressive," he said in a tone that made it clear he didn't think it was impressive at all. "Must have gotten lucky with the pitch," he added. That comment stung, but I let it roll off my back. Or at least I tried to. As the months went by, I started to notice patterns in how Mark treated me compared to how he treated other team members. In team meetings, he would constantly interrupt me mid-sentence. He would dismiss my ideas or suggest that they needed more work. But when other team members, always his personal favorites, suggested similar ideas, he would praise them enthusiastically. "That's brilliant thinking," he would say. "Why didn't we see that sooner?" I watched as promotions went to people who had been at the company for less time than me and who did less work. I watched as projects I had built from the ground up were reassigned to his cronies. I watched as credit for my ideas went to other people. First, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down I knew what was happening. Mark was systematically undermining me. One morning, I received an email about a major proposal that I had spent 3 months building. The proposal was comprehensive and detailed. It included market analysis, client needs assessment, and a complete implementation plan. I had worked nights and weekends on that proposal. But when I opened the email, I saw that my name had been removed from the document. Mark's name was listed as the primary author. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I printed out a copy of the email and walked straight to Mark's office. I tried to keep my voice calm and professional. "Mark, I think there's been a mistake with this proposal. My name seems to have been left off as one of the authors." He looked at me with complete indifference. "Oh, that," he said with a casual shrug. "I didn't think you could handle the pressure of this presentation. So I decided to have someone more senior take the lead." I stood there, staring at him, unable to speak. After that incident, I started paying closer attention to what my coworkers were saying. During lunch breaks in the break room, people would pull me aside and apologize for not speaking up. "We know what's happening," one colleague named Patricia told me quietly. "We know Mark is being unfair to you. But honestly, we can't afford to get on his bad side. He controls our schedules and our performance reviews. If we speak up, he'll retaliate against us." I understood their position. I didn't blame them. But it reinforced what I already knew. I was alone in this situation. Nobody was going to save me. Nobody was going to step in and defend me. I had to figure this out myself. That realization hardened something inside me. The anger I had been feeling transformed into something colder and more focused. I stopped waiting for someone to help me. I stopped hoping that things would get better on their own. When Mark officially removed me from my leadership responsibilities in that conference room, I made a decision. Outwardly, I appeared to accept my demotion gracefully. I nodded as he explained the new arrangement. I said I understood and that I would transition my responsibilities smoothly. Inside, however, something had shifted. I realized that fighting back directly would only give Mark the victory he wanted. If I argued or complained or tried to defend myself, I would be playing the game by his rules. So instead, I decided to play by different rules. I decided to watch him. I decided to learn his weaknesses. I decided to understand exactly how he operated and what made him vulnerable. As I paid close attention to Mark's behavior, I started to see cracks in his facade. He was arrogant. He genuinely believed that he was more intelligent and more capable than everyone around him. During meetings, he would brag about projects and take credit for accomplishments that were really the work of other people. I noticed that executives would listen to his presentations politely, but their responses were always somewhat lukewarm. They would nod and smile, but they never seemed genuinely impressed. I filed these observations away in my mind. I was starting to understand that arrogance is exploitable. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Arrogance makes people take unnecessary risks. A few weeks after my demotion, one of our major clients called me directly. His name was William, and he represented a Fortune 500 company that had been with Mercer and Associates for 5 years. He was furious. Mark had taken over his account and had made several significant mistakes in the implementation plan. The client had lost money because of these mistakes. William was considering pulling their entire contract. I listened to his frustration and anger, took notes. Then, without telling Mark, I went to work on fixing the problems. I didn't do it for recognition. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I just quietly worked through the night and resolved the issues. When I called William back the next morning with solutions, his relief was palpable. "You're the only person at that company who actually listens," he told me. William kept his contract with Mercer and Associates, but he made it clear to the executives that I was the only reason. A small seed of doubt about Mark was beginning to grow in the minds of the leadership team. I started a file on my personal computer. I began keeping meticulous notes about everything Mark did. Every email he sent that later caused problems. Every directive he gave that contradicted what he had said previously. Every time he took credit for something he didn't do. I saved everything. Timestamps, exact quotes, context. I was methodical and careful. I never rushed. I never got emotional about it. It was just data collection. It was just information gathering. Every single day my evidence file grew. I knew that I might never need it. But if I did, I would be completely prepared. One afternoon, an older colleague named Thomas approached me in the hallway. Thomas had been at Mercer & Associates for 25 years. He had seen many managers come and go. He pulled me into a quiet corner and spoke to me in a low voice. "I've been where you are," he said. "I know what Mark is doing to you. And I want to help." He handed me a folder. Inside were minutes from several meetings that Mark had attended. But the minutes didn't match what Mark had said happened in those meetings. Mark had falsified the records. Thomas had kept copies because he had suspected something was wrong. For the first time since my demotion, I felt like the ground beneath my feet was becoming more solid. I wasn't completely alone anymore. Someone was on my side. Mark was growing careless. He was growing confident, with no resistance from me. He seemed to believe that he had already won. He became reckless in ways he never had been before. During a meeting with executives, he openly mocked me in front of senior leadership. "Allison's just not leadership material," he said with a laugh. "Some people simply don't have what it takes to succeed at the highest levels." Most of the executives laughed politely along with him. But I noticed one executive, the company's chief operating officer, Margaret Thompson, frowning. She didn't laugh. She didn't look amused. Her expression was thoughtful, almost troubled. I filed that observation away. Whenever Mark pushed me in meetings or tried to provoke me, I simply nodded and took notes. I never defended myself. I never argued. I never raised my voice. My colleagues began to feel uncomfortable with the imbalance between us. They could see that Mark was being unreasonable and that I was responding with composure and grace. That imbalance started to change how people viewed the situation. Mark thought my silence meant he was winning. But my silence was actually making him look worse. A few months into my demotion, a high-profile project came up. It was a complex client engagement that would be very visible to the executive team. Mark immediately took control of the project and pushed me out completely. He didn't want me anywhere near it. He was certain that I would somehow undermine him or take credit for his work. But the thing that Mark didn't realize was that I knew more about the technical details of that project than anyone else in the company. I had worked on similar projects in the past. I understood the complexities and the potential pitfalls. And I was watching very carefully to see what Mark was doing. Behind the scenes, Mark started making mistakes on the project. Technical errors, methodology problems, client communication issues. But Mark didn't realize these mistakes were happening because his confidence had made him careless. He didn't seek input from experienced team members. He didn't double-check his work. He just assumed everything was fine. I knew about these problems because I had relationships with the junior staff members working on the project. They came to me quietly with their concerns. I helped them fix Mark's mistakes without his knowledge. The juniors whispered among themselves about how I was the real reason the project wasn't falling apart. The work continued, but the credit went to Mark. From the outside, it looked like he was leading a successful project. The executives were starting to pay more attention. I noticed them asking more detailed questions about Mark's reports and presentations. When Mark submitted numbers and statistics, the executives would cross-reference them with other data. They would frown when inconsistencies appeared. Mark's explanations for these inconsistencies were always vague and unconvincing. Doubt was growing. I could feel it in the air during meetings. The executives were beginning to question Mark's competence. But they weren't there yet. They still needed more proof. One of Mark's closest allies was a man named Victor. Victor had been Mark's friend from a previous company, and Mark had brought him to Mercer & Associates when Mark was hired. Victor had always been fiercely loyal to Mark. But during a meeting one day, something shifted. Mark assigned Victor to a task and then criticized his work in front of everyone. Mark was harsh and dismissive. He humiliated Victor in front of the entire team. Victor's face went red. I could see the hurt and anger in his eyes. After the meeting, Victor distanced himself from Mark. And then a few days later, Victor came to find me. He told me about Mark's upcoming presentation to the board. He said that Mark was planning to present metrics and data that weren't accurate. Victor didn't know why he was telling me this. Maybe he was just tired of being loyal to someone who treated him poorly. Whatever the reason, I suddenly had inside information about Mark's next move. I knew that Mark's upcoming board presentation would be the turning point. Victor had given me enough information to understand that Mark was planning to present fabricated data and misleading metrics. The presentation was supposed to make Mark look good and make the company's performance look strong. But the reality was different. I prepared a comprehensive document with the actual data. I organized it carefully. I included timestamps and sources for everything. I cross-referenced the real numbers with Mark's fabricated numbers. I didn't show this document to anyone. I just prepared it and kept it ready. I was setting a trap. I just had to wait for Mark to walk into it. The day of the board presentation arrived. Mark walked into the boardroom with absolute confidence. He had no idea that anything was wrong. He had no idea that anyone knew about his fabricated data. He delivered his presentation with a smirk on his face. He talked about growth and success and positive metrics. The board members listened politely. Then, near the end of his presentation, one of the executives frowned. "Can you clarify where this data comes from?" the executive asked. Mark stammered for a moment. He tried to explain, but his explanation didn't make sense. Silence fell over the room. Then Margaret Thompson, the chief operating officer, looked directly at me. "Allison, do you have any input on these numbers?" she asked. I stood up slowly and calmly approached the front of the boardroom. I didn't speak in anger or accusation. I spoke professionally and factually. "I've been tracking the actual metrics for these projects," I said. I opened my folder and began presenting the real data. The room became completely quiet. As I presented each data point, I showed how it compared to what Mark had presented. The discrepancies were obvious and significant. Mark tried to interrupt me several times. He tried to dismiss my numbers as inaccurate. But every time he spoke, his desperation became more apparent. For the first time, his mask slipped in front of the board. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just kept presenting the facts. By the time I finished, the board members were looking at Mark with expressions of disappointment and suspicion. The executives called for a formal investigation. I provided my evidence file to the review committee. Everything was there. Emails, documentation, fabricated reports, inconsistencies, falsified metrics. The evidence was overwhelming. Mark tried to defend himself, but his explanations fell apart under scrutiny. His allies, sensing that he was going down, suddenly went quiet. They stopped supporting him. They stopped defending him. People who had been his close friends just a week earlier were now distancing themselves from him. I watched as Mark grew red-faced and angry. I watched as his confidence crumbled into desperation. I watched as he realized that his time at Mercer and Associates was over. A week later, the decision came down. In the same conference room where Mark had humiliated me, the executives delivered their verdict. Mark was terminated for misconduct and falsification of company records. His office was cleared out that same day. His chair sat empty. His desk was vacant. All the papers and files that had once filled his space were gone. It was like he had been erased from the company. I sat in my office and felt something release from my chest. It wasn't victory. It wasn't triumph. It was just relief. Relief that the nightmare was finally over. Relief that justice had actually happened. A few days after Mark's termination, the executives called me into a meeting. I expected them to thank me for bringing the truth to light. Instead, they offered me Mark's position. "We'd like you to lead the division," Margaret Thompson said. "At least on an interim basis, until we can conduct a proper search. But frankly, we'd like you to consider it permanent. I didn't jump up and celebrate. I didn't smile too widely. I just nodded slowly and steadily. Thank you, I said. I'm honored by the opportunity. I'll do my best to lead this division effectively. Inside, I felt validation. My years of hard work were finally being recognized. My competence was finally being acknowledged. But I kept my emotions in check. I remained professional and calm. That evening, I sat alone in my new office. Mark's former office, actually. I had changed almost everything about the space. I had removed his pretentious decorations and replaced them with things that meant something to me. I looked out the window at the city lights below. I thought back to that first day in the conference room when Mark had humiliated me. I thought about how angry I had been. I thought about how tempting it would have been to scream at him or quit right there. But I had chosen a different path. I had chosen patience. I had chosen strategy. I had chosen to let his own arrogance destroy him. I picked up a pen and wrote a note to myself. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't fury. It's proof, patience, and letting arrogance destroy itself. I looked at those words for a long time. They were true.